And welcome back to the program. Joining us now is Dr. Nicole Butts, a best-selling author and cultural strategist who helps leaders and high-achieving women transform their lives. Yes. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, you are the author of this best-selling book,
Yeah.
Shift, a 5-step framework for transforming organizational culture. What does SHIFT mean?
SHIFT is actually an acronym. So each letter in the title stands for one of the steps in the process. So the first step in the process is to set your North Star. So organizations get to identify the cultures that they want to create. So they first have to say, okay, what do we want to create? Why do we want to create it? So where are we trying to go as an organization? That's setting their North Star. The second step in the process, the H, is for here. Think of here like an amusement park map where you put a big X as
You are here.
You are here, exactly. So we then assess where they are right now in relation to that North Star. So a lot of organizations start with doing an analysis first, like an employee engagement analysis, but they get lots of data and they don't necessarily know what to do with that data. So in this process, the first step is to figure out who it is you want to be. What's your organizational culture that you're trying to create? Where are you in relation to that? So now we've narrowed down the data that we're actually looking at. I is for illustrate the path forward. So once you know where you're trying to go and you know where you are now, you can then illustrate how you close the gap between those two things. F is for forge ahead. Lots of companies start with forging ahead. They have lots of work they're doing, lots of busy initiatives they're engaged in, but like the old saying, if you don't know where you're trying to go, any road will get you there. So F comes after figuring out where you want to be, where you are, and how you get there. Now we actually forge ahead.
Can I be honest? When you say that companies get to choose their culture, sometimes I look at companies, and I've been in one of them, and I look and I thought, who would ever have chosen this culture?
It's a great question, but here's what often happens, Mark. The values that they have posted on their walls are not the behaviors in the halls. So SHIFT is about making sure that the behaviors in the hall match what you have posted on the wall. That's the point of the SHIFT process, of the SHIFT framework.
That makes sense. I want to turn to a section here
Sure.
In your book, and the chapter is called Consciousness plus Courage equals Transformation.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
What it means is consciousness is about making a decision, again, about who it is you want to be as an organization. Also being aware of what gets in the way of that.
Oof.
You know, a lot of times we say, here's what I'm trying to do or here's who I'm trying to be, but we don't look at the barriers to getting there. So part of the consciousness includes not only identifying the what and the why is really important, but also the barriers that often get in the way. So now I'm conscious about where I'm trying to go and how I want to get there. But I also have to have the courage to take the steps. So you use the example of working in an organization where they weren't living up to the values, or it wasn't an organizational culture that you liked, right? So what
the company shall remain nameless.
Of course, they should all remain nameless. So what happens is oftentimes they determine what those barriers are, but they don't have the courage to push through them. And you've probably seen this, for example, where you have people managers who are great at bringing money in, great at bringing clients in, but they treat their employees really badly, and the organization wants to keep them because they're great money makers, right? They don't have the courage to actually overcome the barriers that get in the way of the culture that they want.
Yeah.
So the courage is about having the courage to make those rough decisions. It's those two things together, the consciousness and the courage, that allows you to get to transformation.
You're a doctor, so let's have some diagnosis here. Right?
Okay.
You work with a ton of executives.
Yeah.
Let's diagnose what the mistakes are that leaders are making when it comes to this company culture, like where you veer off from the poster on the wall.
Yeah.
What is the top mistake that you see leaders making?
The top mistake leaders make is that they do not recognize their impact on company culture. So leaders often have a very kind of a master of the universe sense of self when it comes to market expansion or bringing in money, but they don't apply that same sense of influence and power to the impact that they have on organizational culture. So they say things like, well, I didn't create it, that's just the way it is. But they don't recognize, more often than not, that the culture that exists is the culture they created. Because they're the leadership. Right? So that's the first problem. The second problem is they don't take ownership for the role they play every single day in the culture that's there.
They're not looking in the mirror.
They're not looking in the mirror. Hence the consciousness plus the courage. They have to have the consciousness. They need to look in the mirror to understand the role they play, the impact they have, and then they have to have the courage to do something about it.
All right, I've got less than a minute left, but
Okay.
I have to ask you,
Yeah.
if you've got a bad leader, we know people out there watching right now have some, how do you deal with them? How do you as an employee, you're not a leader,
Yeah.
but you've got a bad one,
Yeah.
maybe even bad culture.
Yeah.
What do you do?
So the book actually talks a lot about that because one of the interesting things is in your sphere of influence, whether it's with your team, your division, however large or small, you have the ability to ask certain questions and to engage in certain conversations that can challenge the status quo of your organizational culture.
So top tip?
Top tip is to ask questions. One of the best questions people can ask is simply, so tell me why we're doing this way? Is this in alignment with our values? How does this align with our value of collaboration, for instance? Very simple question they can ask.
And they won't get fired.
They won't get fired, but they probably need to follow up with some ongoing, like, okay, so now how do we close this gap? Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Udell, absolutely. Dr. Nicole Udell Betts, thank you very much. She is the author of Shift, a 5-step framework for transforming organizational culture. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back.